In the pre-dawn hours of January 30th, 1968, Vietnam was rocked by one of the most pivotal moments in its history. The Tet Offensive, a bold, audacious campaign that shook the foundations of the Vietnam War and reshaped the course of history. But what was the Tet Offensive, and why did it send shockwaves through the world? Join us as we dive into the heart of one of the most intense and consequential battles of the 20th century. I'm Legacy of War, and this is the untold story of the Tet Offensive. Imagine it. A nation already weary from years of conflict suddenly thrust into chaos. As the Tet holiday approached, a time traditionally marked by ceasefire, Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces launched a series of coordinated attacks across South Vietnam. Cities were besieged, military bases overrun, and the world watched in disbelief as the conflict escalated to new heights of brutality. But the Tet Offensive was more than just a military assault. It was a psychological blow that shattered the illusion of American invincibility. For the first time, the enemy struck with such ferocity and coordination that it exposed the vulnerabilities of the U.S. military strategy and eroded public confidence in the war effort. In the aftermath of Tet, the American people questioned the purpose and morality of the war, leading to a seismic shift in public opinion and ultimately influencing political decisions that would shape the future of Vietnam and beyond. Join us on this journey as we unravel the mysteries of the Tet Offensive and uncover the untold stories of courage, sacrifice, and resilience in the face of one of the most turbulent chapters in human history. Subscribe and stay tuned as we delve deeper into the Tet Offensive. In the days leading up to the Tet Offensive of 1968, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces were engaged in a meticulously orchestrated campaign of preparation, secrecy, and coordination. Deep within the labyrinthine network of tunnels and hidden bases, plans were finalized, supplies stockpiled, and troops mobilized for the impending assault. Every detail was scrutinized, every contingency accounted for, as they prepared to unleash a wave of coordinated attacks that would shake the foundations of the Vietnam War. With the support of sympathetic villagers and a network of underground operatives, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces moved with stealth and precision, exploiting weaknesses in American and South Vietnamese defenses and laying the groundwork for a campaign that would change the course of history. Ho Chi Minh, the revered leader of North Vietnam, played a significant role in the planning and execution of the Tet Offensive. While not directly involved in the tactical details, his leadership and strategic guidance shaped the overall direction of the offensive. As the leader of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh provided ideological inspiration and political direction to the military leadership, emphasizing the importance of the offensive as a means to achieve the reunification of Vietnam under communist rule. He also played a crucial role in rallying popular support for the offensive among both the North Vietnamese population and sympathizers in the South. Ho Chi Minh's stature as a revolutionary leader and his unwavering commitment to the cause of Vietnamese independence lent legitimacy and resolve to the Tet Offensive, making it one of the most significant military campaigns of the Vietnam War. For the U.S., during the last 3 months of 1967, intelligence agencies had observed signs of a major North Vietnamese military buildup. In addition to captured documents, the observations of enemy logistical operations were also quite clear. In October, the number of trucks observed heading south through Laos on the Ho Chi Minh Trail jumped from the previous monthly average of 480 to 1,116. Despite all the warning signs, however, the Allies were still surprised by the scale and scope of the offensive. Since in the Allied estimation, the Communists hardly had the capability to launch such an ambitious enterprise, there was little possibility that the enemy could initiate a general offensive, regardless of his intentions. In the days immediately preceding the offensive, the preparedness of Allied forces was relatively relaxed. Hanoi had announced in October that it would observe a 7-day truce from the 27th of January to the 3rd of February for the Tet holiday, and the South Vietnamese military made plans to allow recreational leave for approximately half of its forces. General Westmoreland, who had already canceled the truce in Angkor, requested that South Vietnam cancel the upcoming ceasefire, but President Thieu refused to do so, claiming that it would damage troop morale and only benefit communist propagandists. On the evening of the 30th of January, 200 U.S. officers, all of whom served on the MACV intelligence staff, attended a pool party at their quarters in Saigon. According to James Meacham, an analyst at the Combined Intelligence Center who attended the party, I had no conception Tet was coming. Absolutely zero. Saigon was the focal point of the offensive, but the PAVN and VC did not seek a total takeover of the city. Rather, they had 6 primary targets to strike in the downtown area: the headquarters of the ARVN Joint General Staff, Tan Son Nhut Air Base, the Independence Palace, the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, the Republic of Vietnam Navy headquarters, and Radio Saigon. Elsewhere in the city or its outskirts, 10 VC local force battalions attacked the Central Police Station and the Artillery Command and the Armored Command headquarters. The plan called for all these initial forces to capture and hold their positions for 48 hours, by which time reinforcements were to have arrived to relieve them. One of the most important targets, from a symbolic and propagandistic point of view, was Radio Saigon. Its troops had brought along a tape recording of Ho Chi Minh announcing the liberation of Saigon and calling for a general uprising against the Thieu government. They seized the building, held it for 6 hours, but killed themselves using explosive charges after running out of ammo. They were unable to broadcast due to the cutting off of the audio lines from the main studio. The U.S. Embassy in Saigon was attacked at 2:45 by a 19-man sapper team that blew a hole in the 8-foot-high surrounding wall and charged through. With their officers killed in the initial attack, their attempt to gain access to the building having failed, the sappers simply occupied the Chancery grounds until they were all killed or captured by U.S. reinforcements that were landed on the roof of the building 6 hours later. 5 U.S. personnel were lost. Over 100 towns and cities were targeted, and a total of approximately 84,000 PAVN VC troops participated in the attacks, while thousands of others stood by to act as reinforcements or as blocking forces. PAVN and VC forces also mortared or rocketed every major Allied airfield and attacked 64 district capitals and scores of smaller towns. The Battle of Hue was the major battle in the Tet Offensive. Initially losing control of most of Hue and its surroundings, the combined forces of South Vietnam and the United States gradually recaptured the city after a little over 1 month of intense fighting. The battle was one of the longest and bloodiest of the war, causing it to negatively affect the American public perception of the war. As many as 50,000 VC and NVA were killed, and the offensive achieved none of its major objectives. VC units were severely crippled and unable to mount new combat operations. The U.S. and South Vietnamese militaries lost more than 2,100 and 4,000 dead, respectively. The leadership in Hanoi was despondent at the outcome of their offensive. Their first and most ambitious goal, producing a general uprising, had ended in a dismal failure. Hanoi had underestimated the strategic mobility of the Allied forces, which allowed them to redeploy at will to threatened areas. It was not until after the conclusion of the first phase of the offensive that Hanoi realized that its sacrifices might not have been in vain. General Tran Do, PAVN commander at the Battle of Hue, gave some insight into how defeat was translated into victory. As for making an impact in the United States, it had not been our intention, but it turned out to be a fortunate result. For the U.S., the Tet Offensive created a crisis for the president's administration, which became increasingly unable to convince the American public that it had been a major defeat for the communists. At the time of the Tet Offensive, the majority of the American public perceived that the war was not being won by the United States and its allies, despite assurances from the president and military leaders that such was the case. In 1969, the year after the Tet battles, the U.S. suffered 11,780 killed, the second highest annual total in the war. This was a clear indication that the North Vietnamese were capable of ongoing offensive actions despite their losses at Tet. Most Americans were tired of suffering so many casualties without evidence that they were going to stop any time in the foreseeable future. Phase 2 of the offensive would start late April 1968, and the war would rage on for another 6 years. Join us again tomorrow for more on the Vietnam War.